Okay, so now I'm going to explain a little bit about in-text citations or parenthetical citations. These are not the quotations themselves, but the little thing in parentheses at the end that explains where you got it. Basically, they work like a link to the Works Cited page. You should be able to look at the info in the parenthetical and find the entry in the Works Cited page that helps you track down the source. You have to use in-text citations even when you're paraphrasing. Anytime you use an idea that is not yours, you have to cite it, even if you didn't use any quotation marks. In MLA, you need the in-text citations and a works cited. So the in-text citation is like a tiny mini version of the works cited entry. This is different from some other formats you might be familiar with. I think in APA you can get away with just footnotes. I'm not really sure. If there aren't page numbers, that does not get you out of doing an in-text citation. You still have to do it. You either use the author's last name or a shortened version of the title, whatever is first in your works cited entry. So if the person's last name is first in your works cited entry, use that. If the title of the thing is first in the works cited entry, use that. I've got an example down here. This is a tweet from Aquarius Georgia Dunn, who is another person that I made up. Obviously, there's no page number on a tweet, so I just wrote her last name. There's a formula for this as well. In an in-text citation, you put the end quotation mark, then the citation, then the punctuation. So quotation, citation, punctuation, it rhymes. You can remember it. It looks like this right here. These dots represent the quotation. Then you put the quotation mark, then you put the parentheses, then you put the period. Sometimes this confuses your spell check, but it is the correct way to do it. There is one small exception that probably won't happen for you guys because most of the time these theorists and critics and scholars that you're citing don't use a whole lot of question marks or exclamation points. But if there is an exclamation point or a question mark, you put it inside the quotations, then do your citation, then put your punctuation at the end. This is really going to confuse spell check, but it is the correct way to do it. So I've got another example down here. Same thing, you see the quotation, not the quotation, the question marks and the exclamation points right here, then the citation, then the punctuation. That is how you do it, for sure. And the reason for this is in English, periods and commas don't really mean anything, but exclamation points and quotation marks do have a very specific meaning to people. So if somebody has used one, it counts as part of the meaning of their quotation, so it's included within the quotation marks, and you just put a regular full stop or period, whatever you call it, at the end. For MLA in-text citations, generally they want a page number and the author's name if you haven't already said the author's name, but most of you will have already said it in your lead-in phrase. If the author's name is in the lead-in, you just omit it in the parentheses. Never omit the page number if you have one, and never write on page 4 as part of your lead-in. There are so many different versions of books that information is just not helpful. Here are some examples down here. Students should write lead-ins for their quotations. Smith 4. You could put Smith's name in the sentence instead. And again, I just want to remind you that the in-text citation is not the same as the works cited entry. They're just totally different things, and you've got to have both. And also don't feel like you have to put all the information from the works cited entry in the parenthetical. It's really just the last name and the page number, or just the page number, or just the last name or the title. Like whatever small piece of information will properly link it to the works cited entry. There are some special cases. I've basically given you guys this as a reference, but I'll go through it very briefly. If you have more than one work by the same author, the parenthetical citation has a last name, a shortened version of the title, and the page number. There's an example down here, Faulkner, As I Lay Dying, 75. You should also never put a comma between the title and the page number or the last name as in the page number. You just never need to do that. It's not required. If you've got a work by 2 or 3 authors, you can write them all out or write et al. You can do whichever. It's your call. If you've got 2 authors with the same last name, you can start with the first initial. If you have an author that's a corporation, you use the corporation name as the name. If you have an anonymous author, you just use the title. If the author's quoted in another source, you put a little QTD in front of it, but don't do that. We talked about that for ILP3 about why you shouldn't do that, so avoid that as much as humanly possible. We won't run into that. I'm not going to run into that either. Okay. And finally, I wanted to show you a little explainer of what actually goes in an MLA citation and why. The general formula is to have the last name, the first name, the title of the container, so the thing it's in, other contributors, the version number or the volume number, the publisher, the publication date, and the page number, if there is a page number. Not all sources are going to have all this information. Y'all have already run into this. Some things have titles but not names. Some things don't list the publisher, or some things don't have a publisher. Some things aren't in journals, so they don't have volume numbers. It's all fine. If it's missing, you just put what you have. But I wanted to show you kind of what the purpose of this is. It's so that people can find it. And I know you think, why not just Google it? But as I said before, not all versions of books are the same. And when I'm grading your work, I need to know exactly what you looked at. So the author basically tells us who wrote it, the title of the source. You need to use the title of the actual piece you're talking about. So not the name of the website, the name of the actual page you're on. So for example, if you're reading a thing on National Geographic about turtle shells, the title would be Turtle Shells, not National Geographic. National Geographic would be the name of the container. So container is what website, newspaper, journal, or book it's from. Other contributors is your place to shout out to anyone who may have translated it or edited it or added to it in some way. Sometimes people put who wrote the introduction. The version number basically only applies to journals. What's the volume number? What's the issue number? Sometimes it applies to different editions of books. The publisher tells us who published it. The publication date tells us when it was published. And the location in the work basically is for me. So when I find your source, where am I going to find that quotation? Is it in a certain page? Is it in a certain paragraph? You're not always going to be able to tell me that because sometimes it's going to be a tweet or sometimes it's going to be a web page with no page number. And that's okay. But the more of this I have, the easier it is for me to find the thing that you're working with. Okay, that's everything. Feel free to come back to this if you come into some problems and need to look at these special cases, or just email me with questions or group me with questions and we will figure it out. Okay, I'll talk to you next week.